We did. Hmm.
Yeah. So now we are being recorded. This is Hangoutology number 2. Welcome everybody, which is 4 of us here. David Amram, Nidi, Michael Spudik, and myself, Nenad Bach. And the mic is yours, David.
Well, I'd just like to, first of all, thank you, Nenad Bach, whom I met 36 years ago, I believe it was, your third week in New York, just to see all the wonderful things, not only that you've done since then, but that you're still doing. And to Michael Spudik, who not only helps out young musicians and young songwriters, but even helps out older, I wouldn't say old, but older composers like myself and other people to continue to do what we feel we were put here to do. And also, while she can't appear on the air, someone, Dr. Nidhi, who was kind enough to help me to get on the first show, when I was patient enough to allow me to be her patient and spend 40 minutes learning how to get on Parlor, I believe it's called.
Clubhouse.
Clubhouse, I'm glad, thank heaven, on Clubhouse, which any, my 7-year-old grandson could do in a minute, but which took me 45 minutes, and also does wonderful work in the medical community, and all of the listeners who care about this and who follow Nenad's wonderful example of how to be an artist and also contribute something to the world as well as to yourself, which of course is the most important thing. That's why we're all in music and life and medicine or whatever you do, where you're trying to make some kind of a contribution while you're here. And that's really important. And I think very important for people to know and to see that there are people who aren't psychotic nutcases who, because of being so marginalized, assume that the last thing that you can do is to try to be helpful. That's already reaches the patronizing, disgusting area. But just to make a contribution, and everybody, every single human person can make some kind of a contribution. And that's much more satisfying, much more rewarding, better for your health, and more fun.
It's like ping pong.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for having me on here, and was very lucky to have met Nenad on Clubhouse so randomly, and I feel very privileged to meet you both and learn from you. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you.
So what are you eating? David, what are you eating?
Oh, I was just having a late breakfast. I got up this morning, but due to my insane schedule, I took some English muffins that my daughter had sent me. I was going to cook them about 10 o'clock this morning, and 10 hours later, I finally got to put them in the oven just before I called you up. I was with a wonderful man who comes from way in the Pacific Northwest who has an independent radio show, and he'd just been at the Jazz Festival and gave me a wonderful report of all the terrific stuff that was being done up in Newport, and had a wonderful time with him and his family. I'd met him, and I told him all about the work you're doing now in helping playing ping pong, which I'm sure the audience would be interested in. Because he said, have you watched the ping pong players at the Olympics? And I said, I think the Olympics are incredible and really enjoy watching them and seeing the good sportsmanship and the bravery and the courage and the skill of all those people. While my heart goes out to all the people in Japan who are risking their life to even show up there, it's a wonderful thing, certainly to sit at home and watch it on television and to know about it and to see that sports like music and art and poetry and everything else are in international language. And I said, however, when I saw the ping pong players, I figured I better never dare play ping pong because they were sort of like an Olympic champion, monster killer, 100-mile-a-second athletes. And I like the old paddleball style of ping pong that you play with your children. And then I told them about you and how for people who have Parkinson's, they can use ping pong as a way of dealing and healing with their situation. And I thought that was wonderful. And I told him that I was going to be on your show.
It's good. So this is the train that we hear, yeah? You're living close to the tracks. Did we hear the train?
David, we could hear a train in
Oh,
the
yes, the train. Yeah.
background.
Well, I live close to a train station
That's nice.
here in
I
Beacon,
love
New York.
trains.
I'm right by, and I love hearing that sound
Yes.
because when I was brought up on a farm in Feasterville, Pennsylvania, I used to hear the sound of what they called the Silver Streak long before the movie was made, which was a train called the Crusader that went from Philadelphia to New York City and passed through Somerton Springs, which was about 1.5 miles from our farm in Feasterville. And I used to hear that train at night, and it just gave me the idea somehow, maybe someday I could go on that train to New York. It didn't stop at Feasterville, but maybe I could get on that train and maybe go to New York City, which I've seen in the movies, and possibly at least see a band or do something or hear something or be some kind of a situation where I could be in music, just sort of like a fantasy of a farm boy way back then. And of course, that's still a dream that sort of came true. And I still think about that. And every time I hear this train whistle or any train whistle, I'm reminded of that wonderful feeling and the great old train songs by Jimmy Rogers and other people who loved this country and loved the idea of dreaming about a better life and saw the train as something that was a beautiful way of traveling to achieve those dreams.
It's evoking a lot of memories. Train, everybody has train has some significance. Anyway, and head off to you because so I'm at home here. So
Yeah.
anyway, I wear my hat for 36 years. Now I can take it off a little bit.
And I think I'm going to put in my earphones so I can hear you even better.
Mm.
And that way I won't. Oh, can you hear me? Okay, I'm not using my
I
microphone.
can hear you very well. Can
Wonderful.
you hear me?
I'll skip that. Great. Okay.
I see a number of pictures on your wall.
Ah,
I'm curious what they are.
now I can hear you perfectly.
Yeah, I can see a number of pictures behind you. Can you tell us who is on these pictures?
Oh, the pictures.
Yeah, on the wall, on your wall. behind you.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Okay, well, those are. Let me see. I have to look at the screen so I know.
Yeah,
That one in the upper left-hand corner is a program I did at celebrating Thelonious Monk's music and my music for a special program, and I'll have to look on the wall because I can't see, saying Black History Month with 2 free concerts. And the first one was Reflections of Amram and Monk, which I was honored and thrilled to be with. And
where was that?
That was put on by Earl McIntyre and his wife Renee Manning, who were teaching at the Brooklyn Conservatory of Music. And I had been the conductor for 29 years of music for young people, where we did Bach and Beethoven and Thelonious Monk's music. And we even had the great Betty Carter narrate Peter and the Wolf. And we did the European classics and music from around the world. And this was starting in 1970. In fact, we had Wynton Marsalis played his first symphony concert. He was still in Juilliard and playing with Art Blakey part of the time, and was out on tour. But the first trumpet player said no. Wilmer Wise said, "I can't do it, but you're going to get someone who can play jazz and play the Haydn trumpet concerto, does both great." And he said, quote, "You won't be disappointed." And Earl McIntyre, great trombone player, arranger, composer, educator, and his wife, an amazing singer named Renee Manning, put on these programs at the nearby Brooklyn Conservatory, and I was honored to be part of those programs. And that was that picture, which I treasure. Another one is, I don't know if you can see all those, upper left-hand corner. Let me see. I have to strain. I'll have to. Well, I'll just say who they are, and then if anybody comes by my place, you can see them.
A
There's,
lot of American heritage on your wall.
there's one of Charles Mingus wearing his beret. That was the first person I played with, 1955, my third week in New York, when I was in Cuba with Dizzy Gillespie and Stan Getz hugging each other. I'm the person on the right, and Los Papinas and Paquito de Rivera and Arturo Sandoval and Rodney Jones and myself playing the horn. Then a picture of my daughter and myself, a picture of Dizzy, whom I met in 51.
Where is that?
Who was, he's up, can you see that one up there?
Up next to you, on the right from you and your daughter, yeah?
Yeah, you're on right, on the, I guess so, yeah. I have the computer pushed away so you could sort of see. And then there's a picture of Charlie Parker and Miles, who were just magnificent players. And I met Bird, Charlie Parker in 52. There's one of Pete Seeger and myself at the end of his life when we were played together.
Yeah.
And
which kind of keyboard do you have?
yeah, then a bunch of stuff on the wall of Jerry Dodgen, a great sax player whom I played with for years. And the famous picture of Charlie Parker and Monk, Roy Haynes and Mingus when they were all playing together. And a picture of my son when he was getting married, and my grandson, and some wonderful family tree from the old country, and a great thing written in Hebrew that my great-great-grandfather made and brought over with him, and a bunch of other stuff. They're all different things from my life, and to remind me how lucky I am, first of all, to still be here, and secondly, to have people that I honored and can look back on to remind me that I'm supposed to try to do a good job and not just become a jerk or a soured, disappointed bum out artist, whining and complaining and turning off a whole new generation by saying, that was the good old days and you suck. I met, and I still meet people like that, but fortunately, I've met other people like Michael Spudik, who's on the show, who instead of whining, complaining, groaning, and bumming everybody out, works in the music field and encourages, inspires, and mentors musicians, songwriters, singers, conductors, composers, guitar pickers, and listeners. That music is an important, healing, beautiful, immortal art form, bigger than we are. Or to quote Michael, which he just said when I was congratulating him before we went on the air, he said, well, it's all about the music. So if I could introduce someone, Nemad, who's on your show, he is all about the music. And that's about the highest compliment anybody can get, because it's about their commitment to something bigger than any of us will ever be. Mr. Michael Spudik.
David, but behind all that music, it's all about the people that create it.
Amen.
Music without them. So
Right.
it's a work in progress always, and it's always the variables that connect and combine. And when we have a David Amram out there, that's a meteor flashing. We got to take care of it. We got to nurture. We got to look everywhere. Your grandson, we met him, I believe, at Theater for the New City, downtown. He was quite active that evening. What's he up to these days? And is that a future musician? Is he looking at his grandpa and thinking about music?
Speaking of my grandson told me,
yes.
He told his mother that he's been very nervous the last month. She finally said, well, tell me. He said, well, I think I'm in first grade and I'm falling in love with someone. I don't know what to do. So he's entering into the great mystery of life. And when I see him, I'm going to remind him that ever since Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, that the rents have been too high, and men and women are still trying to figure out what to do, especially men, because we don't have a clue
It's
And
getting
now
complicated.
we're beginning to get a clue that 52% of the world's population are not just doormats
Right.
or, or
Men are
doormats.
getting more feedback, huh?
So we're getting a tiny clue, and most of the clue I get from my daughters. And every time they're speaking, and I'm just a fly on the wall, I say, "Wow, I didn't know anything about that." So it's just an educational process, and I learn a lot from him. I know I was asked to write a song for Morley for her wonderful record she's doing for kids from around the world. And to get an idea, I tried to flash back to when I was 6 or 7 years old, like my grandson is, and realize he is not interested in my rhetoric. He's got he's got his own thing. So I've got to be able to tune in to how he is feeling and see something about his world. So that's a good way for all of us to think about everything.
Yeah.
Try to put yourself in someone else's shoes.
Let me ask you about the current question, something like that. I'm curious in your opinion about quitting or not quitting. And I know that people usually say never quit, don't quit ever. But I have I have different opinion. But recently about this gymnast that quit team or something like that. My opinion is say not quitting. Who is for never quit again? Never quit, and then everybody will raise their hands. Then I tell them, I'll tell you a story. Like the man decided not to quit, so he climbed, put the ladder on the building, and climbs, and then atmospherelia, somebody's pissing on you, they're throwing rocks down, but you don't give up. You just go up the ladder, go up, and then rain and frozen ladders, but you still go up and go up. At the end of the life, you come to the top, and then you see that you put the ladder on the wrong building. So is good quitting or not?
No, I think sometimes you can realize you've been maybe climbing up the wrong ladder, or you've reached the so-called top and you say, well, now it's time to move on
To another building.
or to do something else. Or I tell people sometimes I'm making comeback number 237,308 on the French horn, because there's so many pictures of me playing the French horn in the 40s and 50s when I was lucky enough to be with all these giants. And so now for me to go out, if they say, where's the French horn? I say, whoa, I better bring it. And then I can't play it. All those pictures, all those records I was lucky to be on, that doesn't mean anything, because if I'm putting that up to my mouth, I'm supposed to be able to play something, which means get back into salt mines, go back to nursery school and practice. And that's hard.
How are you with the stage fright? How do you experience live performance?
Well, live performance is to me is a vacation from composing. Dizzy told me, he said, every morning, Dave, he said, that trumpet's sitting in the case just waiting for me. I said, whoa. You never think someone who played that magnificently and creatively, was such an innovator and such an entertaining, a magnetic person, would ever have a problem. And he made it clear to me every day, you got to hit that old practice or else. And that's a kind of a wonderful and a very humbling thing to do. And then when you get to the performance, uh, just like after you've composed the piece, then it's a different thing. If you're composing, you just sit back and the audience and become a vicious critic of yourself to do better. And secondly, when you're playing, I think you forget about all the stuff that you ever knew, and you try at that moment to be in that moment and make it something that the music kind of tells you what to do. And then occasionally you get that good feeling that the people that you're with are all on the same page, and you forget all about yourself and you just get into music. And the rest of the time, you use your knowledge to try to get through it. And if you really think that you're being a drag, you don't let anybody know about it and curse and make faces and that kind of thing. You learn to get over that, because sometimes people might be enjoying it and then you're ruining their enjoyment. And secondly, making them feel foolish that they like something that you feel sucks, which is yourself. So you keep all that stuff hidden. And it's just nice to go out and hope that the people that you're playing with feel glad that you're there, and you hope you're amazed and grateful if anybody appreciates it. And for all those listening who are struggling, which we all are, if the band doesn't outnumber the audience, you're a great success.
That's a great line. And you are doing solo. And when you're doing solo, when the audience is less than band, then it's zero.
Well, the famous story was the guy who went out and they said, man, he was so grouchy, disreputable, nobody could stand being with him. So he said, well, the hell could you all? I'm going to go out and be a solo act. So he went out and said, how's he doing as just going out there by himself? He said he finally quit doing that. They said, how come? He said, because he couldn't get along with the band. So the best thing is you realize you have to be harmonious with those and respectful with those who you play with, and you have to be respectful of the audience. Sonny Rollins was always that way. All the great people in Sir James Galway, I wrote a flute concerto. He was that way, and I said, Sir Jimmy, I said, you're so terrific, because being one of the top five grossing solo artists in the world and doing it on the flute and playing all that music, you're still friendly with the people in the orchestra, and you're still friendly with the flute players in the orchestra, and you're gracious to the audience and kids, and the people want to come up, you'll talk to them. And he said, well, David, he said, where I come from in Ireland, we don't endorse putting on airs. And I said, wow, that should be on the hallway of every institution of higher learning, the halls of Congress, everywhere.
Can you repeat that, because I didn't understand? What did he say?
Oh, he said, I asked him how he could just be so gracious and modest to anybody and everybody. He said, well, in Ireland, where I come from, we don't endorse putting on airs.
Putting on airs means like putting nothing.
Yeah, putting on airs means snubbing people or telling them,
putting on airs.
I am great and you suck.
Right. Pretentiousness.
Exactly.
I'm getting English lessons today.
Me too.
Actually, every day.
Oh,
We're all learning.
that's right. And I'm getting a diction lesson, because I forget, as we all do sometimes, that when you think rapidly, you speak so fast, no one can understand it. And then sometimes if you hear an interview of yourself, you say, man, what did I just say? Because you can't even understand yourself.
Yeah.
David, may I ask a question? Speaking
Please.
of languages, you're a man of language talent and you speak many. Was this a gift that you had already at a younger age? Did you start like as a teenager? Did you have your familiarity with French, German? There are probably other languages in there as well.
No, I'm what they call a slow learner, to put it mildly, as Dr. Nitti can tell you. But sometimes slow learners become the best students, because you learn Jack and Jill run up the hill. Come, Spot, 2 and 2 equal 4. Now, that's not the most interesting thoughts in the history of humanity. However, everything is based on those fundamentals. So when you're learning different kinds of music, which I have, I learned in every language, please. And then the word that
Thank you.
almost vanished from our English vocabulary, thank you.
Yeah.
And then I learned to say, please. That was beautiful. Can you show me that again? Please, please, thank you, please. And then the final thing, please, can you explain to me where is the one? So if there is a where is the one? Dando es uno, por favor. As Dizzy Gillespie said when we were playing in Cuba at the big descargado. Pardon me, the big jam session at the end. Everybody was playing. They all knew where the one was in the rumba clave, which was here one, one and two. But they had that built in, so everybody was playing around that. Man, we were Stan Getz, Dizzy, myself, all the Americans were lost. Dizzy turned and he said to in the direction of Paquito, thank heavens, Paquito, he said, Dando es uno, por favor, baby. And Paquito went, we knew that was the one, and we all knew where the one was. So if you know what the one is, and you could figure out sort of what the key that you're playing in is, and then you can figure out the scale and everything, then at least you've got to start. So a lot of it in languages is the same thing. And because I flunked French every year during my high school years, my mother, who was a good translator, had to make me study le subjonctif, the subjunctive, le plus parfait. I don't even know what that is in English. All these grammatical subtleties. So I was forced during the summertime to continue to try to develop my brain by learning French fundamentals so I could pass the course and get into the next year. So during my 4 years of French, I learned that. Then I lived in Paris for a year, and then I worked with the Montreal Symphony for 8 years, narrating in French and English. And the woman in charge of the children's concert said, I want the children to speak French perfectly, not with a Canadian accent. So she would write out, Bienvenue, mes amis. No, no, bonjour, mes amis. Bienvenue au concert. Now you'll say that, David. I would say, bonjour. No, no, bonjour, mes amis. Bienvenue au concert. And she gave me a crash Berlitz course for the 8 years that I was doing the narration. So instead of being Dr. Speed Freak narration, Jack Kerouac and Goes to Birdland with James Joyce, I had to do it correctly, like a professor who'd gone to the Université de Lyon or Paris. So when the French people say, Bonjour, David, ça me fait grand plaisir à faire la connaissance. Hi, Dave, it's great to make your acquaintance. She would say, No, no, David, ça va bien pour Montréal. That's fine for Montreal. But en français propre, in the highest level of French. And then, of course, she would say, bonjour, mes amis, or ça me fait grand plaisir à faire la connaissance. And I really improved what I was able to do. And that, of course, is the same thing in music.
It's a phrasing.
And there are 100 different ways to do Shakespeare and to do, to do the wonderful French and Spanish and German playwrights in the native tongue. But to do it correctly, that's a lifetime study. And we have that same situation in English. If you study English with someone and they say, good evening, it's such a pleasure to meet you. as opposed to "What's up?" if you're in New York, "What's up?" or pronouncing Staten Island as Staten Island. Staten Island. That's Staten Island. That Staten Island is short for Staten Island or Long Island, Long Island. Wow, what's up, baby? How you doing? What's up, baby? How are you doing? Then you realize all of those are correct because every permutation, every every dialect, as they're called, are simply an expression of how people have lived as a community and how they feel in terms of how they speak. So it's all valuable and it's all correct. But if you could learn the fundamentals of where it comes from, then you can get started on the style. And that's true in music and in life. So if you're learning jazz and you don't know it, that it goes in and out, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. As Duke Ellington said, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Then you're missing the whole boat. So when they try to teach playing jazz as if it were studying real estate taxes, that's okay, but that's a different thing. That's only part of it. And every kind of music has its own specific nuances. And that's what's so exciting about it, because you never get it right. But you learn that there's a lot of different strokes for different folks and a different way of doing the same thing. So when you're speaking a language and there's 300 people auditioning for a production of Hamlet, I did music for 2 of them in Central Park when I worked with Joe Papp. And they say, okay, here's Frank Hill from Trenton, New Jersey. Good afternoon, Mr. Hill. Could you please Hamlet's famous soliloquy that said, "To be or not to be, that's the question." Well, that's what Shakespeare wrote, to be or not to be. That's the question. However, and then they say, next. Well,
David, how did Lord Buckley handle that situation? What would he have said?
well, he had the amazing thing coming from a logging camp way out west and somehow discovering America long before there was the mass media that we have now. He tuned into the poetry and the beauty of African American dialects, of the many dialects, ways of subtleties and ways of speaking, and the way jazz musicians spoke. And he also tuned in to the Old Testament, to the speeches of Mahatma Gandhi, to Shakespeare, and he incorporated all of those things as if he was a crazed member of the saxophone section of a great territory band, along with being a Shakespearean scholar or a prophet. And he did a wonderful version of Mark Antony's speech to friends, Romans, countrymen. We had hipsters, flipsters, and finger popping mamas. And he did the thing of Jonah and the whale, where you really thought he was Jonah in the whale. And he did one of Mahatma Gandhi called the Hip Gan. And he kind of coordinated the beauty of the way a lot of people spoke, which was ignored by society, and transferred that into some of the greatest members of history's society and showed the commonality and inferred the beauty of eclectic speech and everyday folks, which until they discover Bigfoot or the alien, everybody's an everyday folks. But he was able to somehow do that in his own way with this fantastic sense of humor. So naturally, he was the darling of all the musicians like myself who were lucky enough to know and play with him. And Al Capone, of all people, was his big sponsor in the 20s when he couldn't get arrested. Because not only Al Capone never got arrested when he was the king of the bootleggers, but he made sure that when Lord Buckley, to show his distaste for the abuse of women and the excessive power of those who could get away with it, took a bunch of mink coats that were worn by the gal pals of the gangsters and burned them all instead of being buried in cement after they tortured him to death. Al Capone heard about that, told all the gangsters, don't worry about it. They're going to get better coats than before. Bought them all a new coat and bought Lord Buckley dinner because he thought he had such a great sense of humor and a sense of irony. And I mention that not because I'm a worshiper of Al Capone by any means, but sometimes the most unlikely sources became the helpers of the arts. The Medicis were the big sponsors of of a lot of the great artists that we go to and worship from the past, and a lot of the corporations that we might not particularly care for until at least recently sponsored the art that we love, that we figure endorses us. So I think our main concern, if we're working in the arts or languages or anything, is not to try to be like those powers that could become abusive, but try to find a way that we can do what we want to do and not be judgmental of who's in charge of it. Because if we really thought about that, we wouldn't buy, eat, wear, or do anything. Because if you really find out who's in charge of it, as they said in The Sopranos, forget about it. So we can't change society, but we can contribute to society. So our gig is to contribute. And once you see that, and you can have respect for yourself and your heritage and the heritages of every other person, you don't hate yourself, you don't hate others. And as a result, you only want to buy about 5% of what's out there, because the other 95% is all advertised to make you feel less loathsome than you're told you are. So once you dig everybody else and yourself, then you're a menace to the whole trip, because the whole society could collapse. So we all have to find a way every day to make a contribution and never be self-righteous, never put on airs, and hope we can get away with it. And then thank the people who sponsored us, who hate it, who don't even want to do it in the first place. Thank them for being so adventuresome. That's hard to do,
Yeah.
but it's
I-
important.
I-
Otherwise you get bummed out. And once you really get bummed out, then you can't do anything.
High tide bring all the boats up, not just yachts.
Exactly.
High tide,
Yeah, yeah.
all
That's
the
it.
boats get up.
And folks, in case you weren't paying attention, Nenad just said high tide brings all the boats up. And if
Not
I
just
had
yachts.
and if I had said that and known that, I could have said everything I said just with that one sentence. Thank you, Pops. You nailed it.
So we Joe Papp and Shakespeare in the park. That's where you were derailed.
Well,
Yeah.
the beautiful thing with Joe Papp was when I met him, he was working on a church on the Lower East Side. The summer of 1956, they had Shakespeare in the park, and that's when I met him. But they weren't in the park yet. They were in downtown, a downtown park, doing a production of Julius Caesar. And they used the soundtrack from the movie Quo Vadis. I said, oy vey. They didn't need to use Rachmaninoff's greatest outtakes, or sort of 23 hacks all taking Rachmaninoff and changing enough notes not to violate the copyright laws. And actually, it had some very good music in that too, but the way it was done in the production of the park, I said, well, I think that's the best they can do. I don't want anything to do with it. So then that fall, I was called and he said, we're doing a production of Titus Andronicus, and we know, could you do the music for it? And Betty Lou Fitch, wonderful improvising pianist with the Mary Anthony Dance Company, and her good friend Carlisle Macbeth were staying at my place. She said, David, I don't know how to write stuff down. They want fanfares and little things. He said, and I can't do it on the piano. They wanted some brass and wind instruments. You go to Manhattan, you know how to write stuff. Can you do it? And I said, well, it'd be interesting. So I did that. And then I got asked to do the music for the Shakespeare in the Park that first summer. And it was a wonderful experience. But the thing
Which year was that?
1950, summer of 57 was the first year. And I was there for 12 years and ended up writing an opera, Twelfth Night, with Joe doing the libretto. But as a result of starting with him, I realized, man, this guy really practices what he preaches. He wants Shakespeare to be available for anybody and everybody free. And he said to me, and I never forgot it, you know, I was brought up in Brooklyn, and he said, in my family, the first language was Polish, the second language was Yiddish, and the third language was a smattering of English. And he said, I went to the library and I picked up this book by Shakespeare. I heard of him. I started to read it and I was enthralled. And he said, I hoped someday everybody in New York could see one of those plays, whether they came from the highest social level or where I came from of struggling just to get by level. It didn't make any difference because that was something there for everybody. And he said, my studying that Shakespeare made me feel I could do something in life beyond the block I was brought up with in Brooklyn. And sure enough, with all the great success that he had and the notoriety, he never wavered from that dream. And now, 60 some years later, instead of being considered a nutcase with an impossible dream, the Shakespeare Festival is known all over the world. People come to New York just to see that. And a lot of other wonderful festivals have started as a result of that. So it is possible for anybody and everybody to have a kind of a dream and pursue that. And you're doing that 36 years after we met when you first came here, and I met you at Bradley's, and you're doing the same thing you set out to do, plus a lot of other things. And that's a wonderful thing. And I say that not to be patronizing, but so people who are watching this, if you feel you have something you want to do and you're told by a well-meaning career counselor or a relative or a lawyer or a brilliant, well-educated expert, no offense, but you suck. You can't do that. You're too old. There's no market for it. The demographics prove you're being an adolescent. Forget about it. They're entitled to their opinion, but hopefully if you could see some older people like myself, certainly I qualify in that department, and yourself getting there, and Michael Spudik, who's about to become an older person soon. And
We're
we
going to
all,
grow up and be like David Amram.
no, we all love what we're doing. You say, well, man, if those guys are having so much fun, maybe in spite of all that great advice of giving it up, I'm going to give it another 2 more years anyway. And if that happens, then we will have made a contribution. And that's basically why we're all here.
Well, they're right for themselves. You see, they're the ones who cannot do it. So they're
Yeah.
giving advice for themselves.
Sure.
Often the case, yeah.
So I would say you're right for yourself.
Well, I'm trying, and I'm still trying. I remember when Pete Seeger and Toshi passed away, we were at the Clearwater Festival, and someone said, "Do you think they should name a bridge after them? Should we make a statue? Should we?" And I pointed to the river because I said, "Look at that." I said, "That's their thank you message to all of us." Because when Pete and Toshi were looking at that river 40 some years ago from the mountain where they could see it, it was more like a floating sewer. Now people can go fishing and swimming. We have organic food in the supermarkets, even if it's not organic food, at least it pretends to be. So people know there is such a thing. And we have a whole interest in ecology that wasn't considered to be just the province of nutcases, but something that's important for us to survive. So a lot of people can make a contribution in music or in anything that they do, and it's all valuable. And it might not necessarily be appreciated, make you rich and famous or groovy or celebrated, but then you're doing something of value while you're here. And that's the best thing anybody can do, because everything else is forgotten. Dizzy Gillespie said, man, he said, at his 70th birthday, about 4 o'clock in the morning, we were at Wolf Trap Farm, and I was lucky enough to be invited as one of his, because he knew me since 1951, and he said, this music we do is so beautiful. He said, I don't know if America even deserves it, but I'm going to keep doing it anyway. And Chet Baker said, I realized here towards the end of my life, only 2% of the people know, have any idea of what I'm doing, but I'm going to keep doing it because I love doing it. And I think that's important, to realize that doing something the best that you can do and making a contribution is really all that counts. And that's the only thing that really has any lasting value. Everything else goes into the trash heap and landfill,
Yeah.
along with the padded bras and hula hoops and other articles that get such enormous attention and then are considered to be out of fashion.
That in itself is a reward.
Yeah,
That
true beauty's got nothing to do with that because the fashions have to change every year,
Yeah.
and something beautiful, truthful, and valuable stays truthful and valuable.
I remember when I came, the first 5 weeks, I went to the school, to I think Cambridge School of English or something like that on 45th Street. 5 weeks intensely for 5-6 hours a day. And there was one teacher, he said, if you see a piece of paper on the floor or a clip, pick it up and make the world better. So I think that I remember that clearly because a small thing that you do
Oh yeah,
makes the world better. Everything doesn't need to be grandiose or celebrated. Just even if nobody sees you, you pick up that piece of garbage that is lying there, unnecessary, and put it in the garbage can and make the world better.
definitely.
Yeah.
And history proves that so many of the best things that happened were just people taking a small action.
Yeah.
And then we think about all those things like the Gettysburg Address wasn't on live on network television. That was at a train station. Sermon on the Mount wasn't done at a ballpark. That was done just a small bunch of people. When Socrates was giving all that hip advice, which Plato wrote down, thank heavens, that was underneath an olive tree. They still got the tree, supposedly. That's the same tree in Athens. They were just hanging out. And he didn't write it, Socrates didn't write it down. Plato did.
It was Hangoutology.
Oh, yeah. And
the
so many
theology.
of the best things were small. That's why the old saying, small is beautiful, is unfortunately or fortunately true. So for those of you, let's say, who tuning in because they would like to be musicians like Nenad and I would like to be, small is beautiful. And I'll never forget hearing Max Roach, Abby Lincoln, and Freddie Hubbard playing at the five spot, the second five spot. There was 5 people there. That included the bartender and the waitress, the 3 of us in the audience. And they played till 4 in the morning because they didn't want to stop doing their gig. And I'll never forget it. And I said, wow, that shows the commitment that all the people had to playing the music, for the music, and for anybody who would show up and listen to it. It was an unforgettable experience. And I say that because I know otherwise people sometimes feel if they were selling a colossal amount of records and then they didn't sell that colossal amount, they would be cut out from the label. All those companies are currently expired. So we're speaking about something that's part of the gigantic landfill. But for those people who still think that you're supposed to think that way, that's fine too. And we all would dream of being able to have enough money to retire and continue to work quietly and be philanthropists or whatever. Still, that's got nothing to do with it. It's that has something to do with business. The tail is wagged by the dog. The tail is not supposed to wag the dog. So if you're working for a gigantic corporation, eventually your job is to go out and plug whatever you do, and you're out there on the road not creating anything new, but between doing something you've already done, you're supposed to do enough stuff so you can make another one that will sell more. And if not, someone who's sitting with a calculator says, whoop, They moved from number 3 to number 7. Get them out of the way and get another person. They used to call that records product, and they used to call the CDs units. So I finally said when I was with RCA a long time ago, and man, I'm proud of those records because they did let me do the best I could. I wonder if anybody that worked there ever listened to them. So what I was, because I was a good-natured guy and was doing something so radically different, I got invited by some of the people whose offices I would go to their parties, and I really said, "Man, we read about you, and our friends told we never heard anything you did. They never got the records." So I bought a whole bunch, and I went to one of those, the last Christmas party. I knew I was going to get dropped with a huge box full of all my records. And I said, "Look, I'm probably not going to see you guys anymore because I'm not selling. I'd love for you to hear what I'm doing." And I gave them away so at least the poor people that work there could hear something. And I wouldn't recommend that. That was just my desperation at the time. But I realized that's really situation almost everybody's in. And then some people I know who were like colossally successful are still terrific, but because they get less colossally successful, they never got over that and feel like they've lost everything in life. And the music always saves you because the music is bigger than we'll ever be.
Mhm.
And the fact that the record industry has collapsed, I think the fact that there's a thing called indie, including the program that you're doing right now, is fabulous because it gives so many people a chance to also go on YouTube and see some of the great performances of the past, to see Pablo Casals playing and Dimitri Mitropoulos conducting and Toscanini conducting, and see Bartok and hear his music being played by people that love it. Wow. And to hear the great jazz and folk and what they now call world music artists, all the global music is just so terrific. For anything that might just be trash junk or payola driven, by definition, designed for the landfill because the people who put it out think it's all worthless anyway. That's democracy. They have certainly a First Amendment right to produce garbage and crap. But there's also the chance for a lot of beautiful stuff to sneak out there for the very first time and give all of us a chance to study what's so beautiful, including the works of people we knew personally that we never could be aware of. So that's a good thing. And that's why it's a joy to be in your program. And if more than Dr. Nidhi are watching it, we're a big success.
Yeah.
David, as you speak to future generations here, how do you feel about the age we're living in? Is this time of adjustment right now? Turmoil? Is it turbulent than it has been in? You've been through a number of decades.
No, it's a lot of turmoil, and it's a lot of truth telling, and a lot of pulling the curtain and the bed sheet over off of the rotted corpse, and seeing a lot of the disgusting, vile, foul, revolting things that have been part of our society, and also a lot of the beautiful stuff that we never knew about, because both are considered to be antithetical to full greed ahead. Everything is cool, baby. Just don't forget to buy this and buy that. And if you don't, you'll be disgusting and no one will really know about you unless you buy this, buy that. And you'll still be disgusting, but you'll be less disgusting. That's kind of the basis of our way we unfortunately are trained to think and to accept that. Now a lot of people are saying, wait a minute, man. And then we're also finding out a lot of the things that we now find disgusting have been happening and been disgusting for a long time. And we either didn't know about it, or we knew about it and hoped no one else would know about it, or ignored it. And now we're seeing that we're all responsible, we're all related, we all have to think and care for each other. And that's no longer the province of New Age spirituality, what I call the Burger Kingization of ancient cultures and religions. Because then when you see someone like that saying, I'm a spiritual guide, and for $300 I'll make you groovy, you immediately reach for the wallet and the silverware, if you have any, and hide it because you know that person's just coming in to rip you off. So those beautiful things that we're being able to see, along with the disgusting things, make us realize that there are things and our people and our music and philosophy and ways of governing and ways of being with one another that are terrific. And we know that there are possibilities, and we can think about hoping to achieve that and sharing that with our kids. And we all have a responsibility to ourselves and our own families and our communities, not to be winologists and blameologists, but to see if we could do just a little bit. And we can, and a lot of us are.
So, talking about self and promoting yourself, I have a book I wanted to show you. It's called Ping Pong Parkinson.
Oh,
And this is a Spanish artist who made a painting. I don't know if you see it, but his name is, it's called Ping Pong Parkinson. It started with a tremor and shaking up the world. His name is Ignacy Blanc, and together with Warren Rosenberg and myself, we put the book together about how ping pong is helping people with Parkinson and the World Championship. And that's this communication, modern communication is incredible, that we are communicating around the world, and this will be seen by I don't know how many people, but will be seen for sure next day on 5 continents. So it's now, I think it's our responsibility to preserve part of the history, oral history that you have in your vault, David.
yes.
I enjoy every minute talking to you and listening to you.
And I have your book too. And if I don't know if I'm in a position. Yes, I am in a position to recommend books. I would certainly recommend that book to everybody. Yeah. Whether or not you have Parkinson's or not is beside the point. If you do, or your relatives do, definitely to read it. And if not, to read it, because you see that people can help one another out.
Yes.
That we can be each other's doctors and patients, and that we can all be concerned about health and sanity. And of course, sanity is mental health.
I think it's incredible sport because all the generations can play. There is a category, 90 plus category in table tennis. So people over 90 years have a category of league.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And grandfather can play with grandson or grand-grandson. They can play table tennis because they can they can hit the spinning ball in the air. So it's an incredible sport. I'm close to be addicted to this sport.
An addiction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good addiction. I mean, that I think they call it good addiction, a good habit. That's a good habit.
Yeah.
To have.
It keeps you in a good physical form. And by the way, 2 days ago, I got a fever, and today I was tested for COVID negative. But I wanted to be sure because I was exposed. You're exposed to people you don't know if they're vaccinated or not.
Oh, I know.
And you cannot avoid always. You wear the mask, but you cannot always avoid.
Yeah.
There are situations that it's unavoidable. So
Nenad, did you say you were exposed, or are you okay?
Yes, I'm okay. Yes, I was tested today negative, but
negative?
I was not. Yes, negative, but I was not sure. Or in Seinfeld, when they said that when George received negative, said he was devastated. So negative is positive? No, negative is good news. So
yes, very good news.
Yeah, so
you should both stay safe, you and Dave.
Yeah, I think
treasured members of a community here.
I think this Zoom is a nice invention that we can communicate, and the message that we heard from you about language, about speaking, how language develops in dialects and all of this. These are very valuable narrative for me. and for the future generations that will hear this. So that's why we are holding this Hangoutology. This is number 2. Number 1 will be published very soon.
Great.
And,
David, before you know it, it will be 91.
Tell me about it. What do they call those? The golden years, or how to handle decrepitude gracefully. But Satchel Paige Mark Twain had the greatest comment about aging, and Satchel Paige took it one step further. He said, more or less, he said, age is age is a question of mind over matter. But that's what Mark Twain said. He said, but what I say is, if you don't pay it no mind, it don't matter. And that's kind of wonderful. And in a certain sense, I think part of the Solomon-esque wisdom of old age is people say, man, he's so wise. He just sits there and then comes up with a one-liner that seems not to have to do with anything. I guess must be that Solomon-esque wisdom of old age. And I figured out it's actually what they call the synapse, which is the electrochemical discharge of the nerve centers, so that when the toenail gives a signal that is aching, by the time it goes up to the ankle nerve center, then gets up to the shin bone, then finally gets to the collarbone, and then gets to the brain bone, the electrochemical discharge is so weak, you forgot what it was that your toe was aching in the first place. So by being completely out of it, you become well adjusted because you're so wise. And a lot of it is just what's happening. But that's very relaxing. So when people say to me, well, what's the secret of your being able to have so much energy and function, be so good natured when you're 90? I said,
What is it?
I said, desperation is very stimulating. And you're only as old as you make other people feel. And beyond that, hang on. And Malachi McCord was the one who told me the great Irish saying, which is, enjoy every blessed day you have because it might be the last one. And I said, wow, how about that? In other words, instead of saying, well, I'm gonna save up all that till, save up all those good things for the future when I can enjoy them. Man, you better not only save up, but pass some of those on and enjoy them yourself because you happen to be here at the moment to do it.
Yes, when they ask me whether I'm depressed because part of Parkinson is depression, I said, I cannot afford to be depressed. I'm not rich enough to be depressed.
And Sonny Rollins told me the most beautiful thing of all. Two things. We were born 2 months apart, and I knew him since 1955. And when I called him, he said, Dave, he said, my birthday is in September. Yours is coming in November. I'm 2 months older than you. Respect your elders. I said, yes, Sonny. And he said, he said, I can't really play the saxophone anymore, and I have to walk around with a walker. He said, but I've never been happier in my life. And I said, really? And he said, yes. He said, because all I do now is think every day about the golden rule and try to live and understand that golden rule. He said, every major religion has a form of that golden rule. And he said, just remember, he said, the body turns to dust, but the spirit lasts forever. Yeah. So I always thank Sonny for passing that on and share that with you guys and Dr. Nitti and all the people who may be listening, just to think about that and try to keep your thoughts looking for the beauty part, not for any solution of when when the Maharishi, who certainly was supposed to represent a thousands of year old unbelievable deep heavy spiritual culture, which is still there, but he became the American international commercialized hero of that. And when he was asked about when I was at a big thing with the Madison Square Garden, and Allen Ginsberg, when the reporters or he showed up, suddenly instead of being Mr. Humble Nouveau Buddhist, started screaming because he knew that would get them to come over, saying, Maharishi, you have 5 limos and 2 country houses, you're a millionaire, what? And your people in your country are starving. How do you deal with that? His answer was, ah! I said, man, is that a hip way for a hustler to act? He just laughed it off. And when Ronald Reagan was a president, was so charming, they said, well, Mr. Reagan, how do you feel about racism today? And he said, when I was a boy, there was no such thing.
Right.
And he laughed. I said, man, those 2 guys, their answer to a really important question is just laugh it off. Well, some things, if we are the recipients of being laughed off at due to some think that we'd like to know the answer or answers or possible solutions, if not to, then we have to think about it or go to another person for a further discussion who isn't going to laugh it off and pretend that it never happened. Ralph Ellison, the great writer, told me, and he'd been a terrific musician before he became acknowledged as a writer. He said, that well-meaning, good-natured, humanistic, decent, fine people who of the Caucasian persuasion who were very concerned and disgusted with the way people of color were treated, regardless of who they were. He said, in order for them to assuage their guilt, they often unknowingly pretended that it never happened or that the people it was happening to weren't really there. Therefore, a lot of people were grown up to feel they were invisible men or women. So he called the book The Invisible Man. And that applies to a lot of people way beyond racism, just because of their conduct or their interest or their achievement or what they do or their particular stance that other people find upsetting, just say they ain't there or just go, ha, 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 ha. And that's not necessarily the best way to deal with problems.
Mm.
Or certainly is not the way to solve them.
So we can end the evening with the soul is immortal, as is art.
Well, I think that's true because I think of all those wonderful musicians. One time when I saw Sonny after his beautiful concert he did for Clearwater, and we were talking about all the people that we knew and I'd met back in 55 who weren't here. And he said, man, most of the cats there on the other side, he said, I'm looking forward to seeing them all again.
Mm.
And I think he really, really believed that. And whether you do or not, those people in the spirit, they're definitely there. Theo Backel, when I played for his 85th birthday at Carnegie Hall, had a huge celebration. And there was for an organization to help out kids. And the place was packed. And I was lucky enough to be one of the people chosen to come and play for that. And he said, ladies and gentlemen, he said, I'm so glad you're here. He said, many of you seem concerned because it was my 85th birthday. They kind of look at me and say, Tio, how are you feeling? And he said, my answer to them, this is what Tio said, was, not to worry. I've never felt better. In the theater, we never die. We just go on tour. So I think, you don't see somebody for a while. You're still with them. You're still thinking about them. They're still with you. Just they're on tour or a different place. And I think, my mom died in 1980 and my father in 1990. And I still think about them and even have little conversations. And every once in a while, if I'll do something really nice, I'll say, man, that's my mother coming through me, telling me what to do. So there's a whole lot of stuff, and I have no idea how any of that works. And I don't think anyone else does either. But there is a spirit out there and the spirit world, and a lot of cultures believe that what we're doing now is an audition for that spirit world. And I would have never dare to tell anybody how to think about that because I don't understand it myself.
To be or not to be.
Yeah, but it's definitely what they call in all the religions the great unknown.
Yeah.
And when you
I
look
feel
at
like I've been on a Hangoutology tour with you, David.
or the rantings of an elderly, of a mature
We are
personality.
auditioning for the tour. We are auditioning for the tour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the great tour.
A pleasure to seeing you and hearing you. And if you don't mind, we will end this Hangoutology number 2.
Good.
And we see each other on September. I don't know which date exactly, but I can check quickly.
Oh, good.
To make sure David's not actually on a tour.
Oh, if I am, I'll take the time. I'll take the time off. Have
That's David Amram.
my laptop here,
Sure.
and hope and tell your friends if they're parents, give your kids or grandkids a big hug. If you're little, give your parents, your brothers and sisters, and your neighbors and friends a big hug, because we all need that. And there's already enough negative, soured, depressed, miserable people, and for them, that's cool too. But you leave that to the experts. The experts can handle that best. So it's more fun on the other side of the coin, and it's more rewarding, and you have a better time, and you meet nicer people, and you can be happier. And it doesn't cost anything to be that way. You just have to decide you're going to think that way.
It is actually Rosh Hashanah, and it's September 7th.
Yes.
I will be in Germany. I don't know. We'll figure it out in the next 30 days how to do it.
Good.
But we will do it every first Tuesday of the month at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we will adjust to the hours as we have developing the whole program.
Terrific.
But thank you so much, David. I appreciate every moment with you.
I thank you. And Nenad, I never thought that 36 years after we met at Bradley's in New York City, that we would be 36 years later, still doing the same thing and trying and hopefully doing it better.
Exactly.
That's quite a number too, 36. It's Kabbalah, that's a magical number, right? 36.
And Michael, one good thing that we forgot to mention, for those of you who say, well, I think I got the mental health, but how about the rest of it? And that is there with Parkinson's is being able to heal himself by playing.
Amazing.
You ride a bicycle, and boy, that's something to be admired in the age of gas guzzling, too much traffic, and everybody falling out with gout and no exercise. So
we all have our peculiar fixations. I'd like to see you on a bike one day, both of you. Let's go for a ride here in Queens, and we'll go to the Jack Kerouac place.
I'm ready.
Boulevard. You ready?
All right.
Come on.
Ozone Park.
Ozone Park, next stop.
Yeah.
Okay. Hang out.
Okay, boys, it's end of Hangoutology number 2. I'll see you soon.
Okay, thank you, Nenad.
Okay, all the best.
Pleasure. Thank you, David. Thank you, Nenad.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Nidhi.
Good night.
Great.